You want to know the strangest thing about the girl? She smiled, right there in the briefing hall when the projection floated in front of her with that number burning cold and blue. 2%. She smiled like somebody had just told her the rain would clear by evening. I was standing 3 rows back. I saw it happen. And I'm telling you this now, all these cycles later, because I've watched a lot of soldiers die, and I've watched a few live, and I have never once in my long life seen anyone do what Cadet Myra Sohn did that day. Let me start from the beginning, the real beginning. My name doesn't matter much for this. I'm Velk. I served 41 cycles in the Concordant Fleet before I ever met a human, and in all that time I thought I understood what courage was. My people, the Thessing, we measure courage the way you might measure the load a bridge can hold. There's a formula, there's a number. You calculate the odds, you weigh the cost, and if the math says a thing cannot be done, then a wise soldier does not attempt it. We don't call that cowardice. We call it arithmetic. Survival is arithmetic. The humans broke our arithmetic, every last equation of it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The station was called Threshold 9. If you've never seen a concordant orbital, picture something the size of a small moon, spun out of gray alloy and cold light, hanging in the dark above a dead world we'd claimed 3 centuries back. It hummed. Everything on Threshold 9 hummed: the recyclers, the gravity plating, the long tube corridors that carried us from wing to wing. You stopped hearing it after a while. Then you'd go planetside for leave, and the silence down there would keep you up at night. The Cadet Corps trained on the lower rings. 40 species, give or take. We didn't mix much. The Thessing kept to the Thessing, the Irvan kept to their pressure tanks, the crystalline sect clustered near the coolant vents where they liked the chill. And the humans, there were only 9 of them in the entire program that year. The humans went everywhere. Loud, warm-blooded in every sense. They laughed in the mess hall. They asked questions in lecture that the instructors didn't want asked. They stood too close when they talked to you. Myra Sohn was the smallest of the 9. I want you to hold that in your mind. She came up to about my shoulder, and I'm not tall for a Thessing. Dark hair she kept cropped short. A scar over one eyebrow she never explained. And she had this way of looking at you, not up at you, even when you towered over her, but at you level, like the difference in your sizes was a technicality she'd already decided to ignore. The instructors hated her. Not because she was bad. She was, in the practical drills, frighteningly good. They hated her because she wouldn't accept a losing scenario. You have to understand how the Corps trained us. We ran simulations, combat problems. And every problem had what they called a resolution ceiling, the best possible outcome given the variables. Some problems you were meant to win, others you were meant to lose correctly, to take your losses, minimize them and withdraw, to respect the arithmetic. Myra Sohn did not respect the arithmetic. The first time I really noticed her was during a boarding sim in the 3rd month. They put a mixed squad into a mock derelict, hull breach, decompression, hostiles in the dark. The scenario was rigged to fail. It always was. It was a lesson about knowing when to pull back. The resolution ceiling was extract 2 of 4 survivors. That was the win. Losing half your people and calling it a victory. I was on the observation deck watching the feeds. 6 squads ran it that day. 5 of them lost 2, extracted 2, and the instructors nodded and marked them passing. Then Sohn's squad went in. She had a sec, an Irvan, and one of her own kind with her. And instead of running the extraction the way we were taught, fast, cold, cut the losses, she stopped. Right in the middle of the breach, with the clock running red, she stopped and she started pulling apart a bulkhead panel. The instructor beside me made a sound in his throat. What is she doing? She was rerouting the derelict's residual atmosphere. Nobody had told her she could do that. It wasn't in the scenario parameters because nobody had ever tried it. She flooded one section, sealed another, bought 90 seconds of breathable air that the simulation hadn't accounted for, and in those 90 seconds she pulled all 4 of her people out. All 4. A scenario built to cost you half your squad, and she walked every soul out of it. The observation deck went very quiet. And do you know what the instructor did? He failed her, marked the run invalid, exploited an unmodeled variable, he wrote, did not demonstrate acceptable loss discipline. I remember she came off the sim floor peeling the sensor rig off her arms, and one of the other cadets, a big Thesang named Doran, cocky, the kind who thought his own reflection owed him respect, he laughed at her. Said something like, "You know they're just going to fail you every time you cheat the math." And she looked up at him with that level stare, and she said, "I'll never forget it," she said. "It's not cheating if the math is wrong." Then she walked off to get water. I started watching her after that, not because I liked her. I want to be honest with you. At first I thought she was reckless, the way we're all taught to think humans are reckless. A species that came up out of a gravity well fighting each other with rocks and fire, that clawed its way to the stars in a handful of centuries. Of course, they don't respect the arithmetic. They never had time to learn it. That's what we told ourselves. But I kept watching, and the more I watched, the less sure I got. Because here's the thing about Myra Sohn. She wasn't reckless. That's the mistake everyone made. Reckless people don't calculate. She calculated constantly. She just refused to stop calculating at the point where the rest of us gave up. Where our formulas said this is impossible, withdraw, her said this is impossible in the following 7 ways. Now let's take them one at a time. The winter of that training year, we didn't have real winters on the station, but there was a cold cycle, a maintenance period where they dropped the ambient temperature to service the heat exchangers. And everyone called it winter. That's when the thing happened that changed everything. That's when the Verity came in. The Verity was a supply hauler. Big, slow, ugly, the kind of ship nobody thinks about until it stops working. It was carrying a full load of medical stores and about 200 civilians, families, mostly, dependents of the station crew coming back from leave. It was making its final approach to Threshold 9 when its containment lattice failed. I was in the mess when the alarms started, not the drill alarms, the other ones, the ones you feel in your teeth. A containment failure on a hauler that size is a slow catastrophe, which is somehow worse than a fast one. The ship wasn't going to explode, it was going to bleed. Its reactor was venting. Its structure was fracturing along the stress lines, and the 200 people aboard were trapped behind a cascade of failing bulkheads that were sealing shut one after another as the automated systems tried to contain the breach. Sealing people in, sealing rescue out. The station scrambled everything. And this is where I need you to understand the arithmetic, because the arithmetic is the whole story. Command ran the numbers. They always run the numbers, and the numbers said the Verity had somewhere between 11 and 14 minutes before its structural spine gave way completely and the whole ship folded in on itself. To reach the trapped civilians, a rescue team would have to cross the docking gantry, breach 3 sealed sections, and haul 200 people back out, through a ship that was actively coming apart, through radiation from the venting reactor, against a clock that no crew could beat. The projected survival rate for any rescue team that went aboard was 2%. 2%, there's that number again. Command made the call I would have made, the call any of us would have made. They declared the Verity a loss. They ordered the docking gantry sealed to protect the station. 200 people written off, because the arithmetic said saving them would cost the rescuers their lives for nothing. Respect the math, minimize the loss, withdraw. I was there in the staging area when the order came down. I saw the faces. Some of the crew had family on that ship, and they stood there and took the order because that's what we do, that's what we've always done. We honor the number even when the number is breaking our hearts. And then a small human cadet stepped out of the crowd and walked up to the duty officer and asked to see the assessment. I'll finish it in the next part, but I'll tell you where we were so you can sit with it the way I've had to sit with it for the rest of my life. 200 people behind 3 doors, 12 minutes on the clock, a 2% chance, an order to stand down already given, already lawful, already correct by every measure my people had ever used to measure anything. And Myra Sohn looking at that cold blue number the way you'd look at a locked door you already had the key for. She didn't argue with the 2%. That's what nobody expected. She didn't say the number was wrong, didn't call it cowardice, didn't make a speech. She just looked at the duty officer and she tilted her head a little, and she asked the question that I have carried with me across 40 years and half a galaxy. She said 2%. Okay, so what about the other 98? What about the other 98? The duty officer didn't understand her. I could see it on his face. He was an Irvan, name of Senat, older, careful, the kind of officer who'd never made a mistake in 30 cycles because he'd never once stepped past the edge of what the manual allowed. He blinked those wide, flat eyes at her like she'd spoken a language he didn't have. Cadet, he said, the assessment is 2% survival. That is the figure. I heard the figure. Her voice was quiet, not disrespectful, just quiet the way you get quiet when the noise around you stops mattering. 2% chance we all die. I understand that. I'm asking about the other 98. What's in there? What are you actually measuring? And Senat, because he was a precise man and precision was the only ground he knew how to stand on, he actually answered her. He pulled up the assessment. He started reading it out. That was his mistake, or his gift, depending on how you look at it. Because the moment he started listing the variables out loud, Myra Sohn started taking them apart. I need to explain something about how these assessments work, or none of what comes next will make sense. When command says 2%, they don't mean a coin came up 2%. They mean a machine chewed through about 10,000 variables and spat out a single number, and that number is only as good as the assumptions underneath it. The assumptions are the part nobody looks at. Everybody looks at the number. The number is easy. The number is comforting in a terrible way because a number lets you stop thinking. Senat read the assumptions. The model assumed the rescue team would move at standard EVA pace. It assumed the 3 sealed bulkheads had to be breached in sequence, one after another, because that's how you breach bulkheads. It assumed the venting radiation followed the reactor's normal decay curve. It assumed the civilians were spread across the whole trapped section and would have to be gathered. And with every assumption he read, Myra Sohn asked a question. Standard EVA pace, is that assuming full caution protocol? It is. We're not being cautious, cut that. Cadet, you can't just. 3 bulkheads in sequence. Why in sequence? Because you have to breach one to reach the next. No, you have to breach one to reach the next if you're breaching them the same way. The middle door, is that a pressure seal or a blast seal? Senat looked, there was a pause, pressure. Then it opens from the maintenance conduit. You don't breach it. You walk around it. She was moving now, pacing a tight line, her hands drawing shapes in the air like she could see the ship laid out in front of her. Maybe she could. The radiation curve, that's the reactor's normal decay. It's not decaying normally, it's venting through a fracture. The fracture's directional. There's a shadow. There's a cold lane through that ship where the radiation isn't, and your model doesn't know it's there because your model assumed a shape the ship doesn't have anymore. Senat stared at his own screen like it had betrayed him. Your 2%, Myra said, and she wasn't quiet anymore, is the survival rate for doing this the safe way, the careful way, the by-the-book way. And you're right, the safe way gets everybody killed. So don't do it the safe way. Now, I want to be fair to my own people here, because it would be easy to tell this story like the Concordant was full of cowards and one brave human shamed us all. That's not the truth. The truth is more uncomfortable than that. Senat wasn't a coward. He was doing exactly what 40 species had spent 10,000 years learning to do, which is trust the number over the impulse. Because impulse gets you killed. History is a graveyard of brave fools who charged the number and lost. We built the whole concordant on the principle that you do not throw lives after a lost cause. It's a good principle. It's kept more of us alive than any weapon ever did. But a principle is a tool. And Myra Sohn understood something that day that took me 40 years to catch up to, that a tool you never question stops being a tool and becomes a cage. The number was supposed to serve the people. Somewhere along the way, we'd started serving the number. Cadet looked at the reworked assessment. Myra had talked him through recalculating it right there live, stripping out the bad assumptions one by one, and the number moved. It didn't move to safe. Nothing was going to make this safe. But it moved off 2%, and the direction it moved was up, and Cadet, I watched this old careful man do the bravest thing I'd seen him do in his life. Cadet looked at her and said, "I cannot authorize this." "I know," Myra said. "I do not have the authority to send anyone into that ship after a stand-down order." "I know that too. So what are you asking me for?" And she said, "I'm not asking you to send anyone. I'm telling you I'm going. I'm asking you not to seal the gantry for 4 more minutes." The staging area had gone silent around us. Everybody was listening now. Cadets, crew, off-duty personnel who drifted in when the alarms hit. 40 species standing in a cold gray room, and this one small warm-blooded creature saying she was going to walk into a dying ship that the arithmetic had already buried. Cadet said the thing that everyone was thinking. He said, "You will die, Cadet. That is not a low probability. On these numbers, that is the likely outcome. You understand that even reworked, even with everything you've stripped out, you are still walking into a ship that is coming apart." "Yes." "Then why?" And here's the part I've turned over in my head 10,000 times. She didn't give him a speech about honor. She didn't talk about heroism. Humans, I've learned, they don't reach for the big words when it's real. The big words are for after, for the ceremonies. In the moment, they say small things. She said, "Because there are kids on that ship, and I can count, and 98 is bigger than 2. That's all. 98 is bigger than 2. Then she turned around to grab a suit off the rack. And that's when Doran, the big cocky Thessane cadet, the one who'd laughed at her in the sim, that's when Doran stepped forward. I thought he was going to stop her. I honestly did. He had that look. Instead, he pulled a second suit off the rack and started putting it on. "You're going to need someone to carry the heavy ones," he said, not looking at her. Gruff, almost angry about it. "You can't lift a grown Irvan. I can." Myra looked at him for a second. Then she just nodded once and kept sealing her gloves. I don't know what makes a person move. I've thought about it my whole life and I still don't know. Because what happened next in that cold gray staging room, I've never been able to explain to anyone who wasn't there. A sec medic stepped forward, then 2 of the human cadets. Then a maintenance tech, an old Thessane woman with burn scars up both arms who knew the Verities class of hull better than anyone on the station, who said flatly, "You'll all die in there without someone who knows the conduits," and started pulling on a suit before anyone could argue. 6 of them, 7 counting Myra. Nobody ordered it. There was no order. The order was stand down. The order was seal the gantry. The lawful correct arithmetic honoring order was to let 200 people die behind 3 doors. And instead, one at a time, 7 people decided the number was wrong and walked toward the airlock. Cadet watched them go. He didn't stop them. He couldn't send them and he wouldn't stop them, and the space between those 2 things was the only place his conscience had left to stand. But he did one thing. As Myra passed him, he said, "Lo, the gantry stays open. 4 minutes. I'll log it as a system's fault." He paused. "I can only give you 4 minutes before the failsafe seals it on its own, and I cannot override it. If you are not back through in 4 minutes after the spine goes, the station seals whether I will it or not. Do you understand? 4 minutes is all the time I can steal." "That's 4 more than we had," Myra said. And she went through the lock. I wasn't supposed to follow. Let me be clear about that. I was 41 cycles into my service, and I had never once in my life disobeyed a stand-down order. And I want you to know that I stood in that staging area for a long moment, probably 3 seconds, though it felt like a year, doing the arithmetic. 2%. Reworked, maybe better, maybe not. My whole life had been built on respecting that number. Everything I was, everything my people had taught me, said stay. Said this is not your cause to die for. Said the brave thing and the foolish thing looked the same right up until the funeral. And then I thought about the human girl in the boarding sim, pulling apart a bulkhead panel while the clock ran red, refusing to leave 2 of her 4 people behind because the scenario said she was allowed to. It's not cheating if the math is wrong. I pulled a suit off the rack. My hands were shaking. I'm not ashamed to say it. 41 cycles of arithmetic don't come off easy. But I sealed the gloves and I checked the seal and I walked to the airlock, and Sennett looked at me, a decorated Thessing who should have known better, and something moved behind those wide, flat eyes that I think, looking back, might have been envy. Envy that he was the officer, and the officer had to stay. Velk, he said, you too. Me too, I said. And I went through the lock, into the gantry, into the cold and the noise and the 2%, chasing a girl who could count. The gantry to the Verity was a flexible tube maybe 40 meters long, and it was already failing when we crossed it. You could feel the ship's death through your boots, a deep shuddering groan that came up through the deck plating and into your bones, the sound of a spine beginning to give. The lights in the gantry strobed. Somewhere ahead of us something the size of a shuttle tore loose and boomed against the hull, and the whole tube whipped like a struck cord, and I grabbed a rail and held on and thought, very clearly, this is where I die, 41 cycles of caution, and I die in a tube because a human asked a question I couldn't stop thinking about. Then I looked ahead and saw Myra sewn already at the far lock, already working the manual override, calm as still water, and I stopped being afraid quite so much. Not because the danger was less. Because she made you believe the danger was a problem, and problems have solutions, and if you just kept your head and worked the problem, the number might move. The first door opened. Beyond it was the trapped section of the Verity, and beyond it were the 200 people the galaxy had already given up on, and the clock in the corner of my visor, the one Sennett had synced to the ship's failing spine, was already counting down. 11 minutes. I'll tell you what we found behind that door, and what it cost, and what the girl did when the arithmetic finally, truly ran out. Because it did run out, I won't lie to you. There came a moment on that ship when even Myra Sohn's math hit a wall, and what she did then is the reason I'm still telling this story. But that's the next part. I'll leave you here in the open airlock, 11 minutes on the clock, 7 people who should have stayed home standing in the mouth of a dying ship, and one small human already 3 steps ahead, saying over the comm in that steady voice, "Okay. Follow the cold lane. Watch your footing. We're going to get them out." 98 is bigger than 2. We went in. The inside of the Verity was a nightmare in slow motion. I've seen combat. I've seen ships die fast, the clean, bright violence of a reactor going critical there and gone. This was nothing like that. This was a big, slow animal dying, and it was worse for being slow. The corridors sagged. The gravity plating stuttered, so you'd take a step at normal weight and the next step you'd be light, floating half an inch, your stomach lurching. Emergency lights bled red through the smoke. And under everything, that groan. The spine. Always the spine, getting louder. Behind the first door, we found the first of them. A cluster of civilians pressed into a service alcove, maybe 30 of them, mixed species, families. They'd sealed themselves in when the bulkhead started closing. A young Thessing father had his back braced against a jammed door with 3 small ones behind him, and when he saw our suits come through the smoke, he made a sound I still hear sometimes. Not a word, just a sound. The sound a person makes when hope comes back after they'd finished grieving it. How many total? Myra was already moving, already counting, her helmet lamp sweeping the alcove. How many aboard do you know? Talk to me. 206, the father said. There are more. Forward, behind the second door, the med bay. There are people hurt, they couldn't move. Okay, no panic in her voice. None, just intake, processing, next step. Okay, this group's mobile. Doran, you and Kesh take this 30 back to the gantry now, go, don't wait for us. Old timer, this to the burn-scarred maintenance tech, the cold lane, where's it run from here? Port conduit. The tech was already at a wall panel, ripping it open. Follows the spine forward, it's tight. Grown Irvan won't fit. Then the Irvan come out the main corridor and we time it around the venting. Everyone else, cold lane. She looked at me. Velk, you're with me. Forward, med bay. I didn't argue. I'd stopped arguing the moment I came through the lock. There's a kind of clarity that comes when you finally give up the arithmetic that's been running your whole life, and I was in it now, all the way in, and it was the most awake I had ever been. We went forward. The clock said 8 minutes when we reached the second door, and the second door was the one Myra had promised we could walk around instead of breach. The pressure seal. The one her reworked math depended on. It was welded shut. Heat from the venting reactor had warped the frame. The maintenance conduit she'd planned to use, the whole reason her number wasn't 2% anymore, was a collapsed ruin of slagged metal. I watched her stop in front of it. I watched the plan she'd built die right there in the red light. And I thought, this is it. This is the wall, because this is where the arithmetic runs out. This is the moment my people are built for, the moment you recognize the lost cause and you honor it and you turn back. 8 minutes. Med bay sealed behind a door that couldn't be walked around and couldn't be breached in time. The number, the real number, the true number underneath all the clever recalculation, was 2% again. Maybe less. I said her name. I said, Myra, this is the wall. We can still get the 30 out. We can still save the ones we already have. If we stay for this door, we lose everyone, including us. The math. I know the math. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the door. I know exactly what the math says. Then, the math tells me what it costs. She turned to me, and behind her visor her face was calm and her eyes were doing that thing, that counting thing, that refusing to stop thing. It doesn't tell me what to do. That part's mine. And that's when I finally understood her. Right there. 8 minutes on the clock in a dying ship, I understood the thing my whole species had gotten wrong for 10,000 years. We thought the number was the answer. She knew the number was just the question, stated precisely. The number tells you the price. It never, ever tells you whether the thing is worth the price. That's not arithmetic. That's not a calculation you can run. That's the one thing in the whole universe a machine can't do for you. The one place where you have to stop counting and decide. And we had been hiding from that decision behind our beautiful clean numbers for so long that we'd forgotten it was ours to make. 2% isn't a verdict, it's a price tag. And Myra Sohn looked at that price, and looked at the people behind the door and paid it. The reactor's venting through the med bay's outer wall, she said, moving again, fast, thinking out loud. That's why it's sealed, the ship's protecting the rest of itself from the radiation. But that means the med bay has a hull breach point already, a weak point. We don't go through the door. We go through the wall the ship already broke. That's the radiation side. That's the radiation side for another. She checked something, 90 seconds until the venting cycle drops. There's a gap. Every venting reactor has a gap. We hit the wall in the gap. It was insane. It was the most human thing I have ever heard. She'd found the 2%'s twin, the 98, hiding inside the exact thing that was killing them. The breach that had sealed the med bay was also the way in. We waited. 90 seconds is a very long time when a ship is dying around you and a clock is eating your life. The venting roared beyond the wall. Then it dropped, a stutter, a lull, and Myra drove the breaching charge into the weakened hull plate. and we went through into the med bay in a rush of decompressing air, into a room full of the wounded who could not walk, who had been sealed in to die, who looked up at two figures coming through the wall like something out of a story their grandparents told. 14 of them, non-mobile, 6 minutes on the clock. We couldn't carry 14 in 6 minutes. That was the new math, and the new math was also impossible. So Myra broke it again. Grav sled. She was already at the med bay's equipment locker. Trauma ward this size has a Grav sled for mass casualty. Find it. We don't carry them one at a time. We float them all at once and push. We found it. Of course we found it. She was right about the sled, the way she'd been right about the cold lane, and the venting gap and the pressure seal. Right, because she refused to accept a wall until she'd walked the entire length of it feeling for a door. We loaded 14 wounded onto a Grav sled built for exactly this, and we pushed them out through the corridor while the Irvine came the other way and the whole ship screamed around us. And behind my visor, the clock burned down through 4 minutes, 3, and I did not think about the arithmetic even once. The spine went as we crossed the gantry. I felt it go. A crack like the universe splitting, and the whole ship behind us dropped and folded, and the gantry whipped and tore, and Senat's 4-minute failsafe began to count down for real now because the spine was gone, and the station was about to seal itself whether or not we were through. We ran. You can't really run in failing gravity pushing a Grav sled of wounded through a tearing tube, but we did it anyway, because 98 is bigger than 2 and we could count. Doran's group was already through. The Cold Lane group was already through. It was just us now, Myra, me, the old tech, and 14 wounded on a sled, and the lock at the far end already showing the amber wash of a failsafe about to close. I'm not going to tell you it was graceful. The last of us came through that lock in a tangle, the sled jamming in the shrinking gap, Myra and the old tech and me all three shoving at it, and the failsafe grinding down toward our fingers. And for one heartbeat I was certain the sled would stick, and we would either abandon 14 people in the gap or die holding it. The arithmetic's final joke, the last 2%. And then Doran's huge arm came back through the closing gap and hauled, and the sled tore free, and we came through in a heap onto the deck of Threshold 9 as the lock slammed shut behind us, and the Verity finished dying in the dark outside. Silence, the real kind, the kind you feel in your teeth. Then someone started counting the survivors, and the count came up 206, and the count did not stop at 206 because it kept including the rescuers, all 7, all alive, and somewhere in the crowd, a small one started to cry and a mother's voice answered it, and the sound of that, I'm an old soldier and I'm not ashamed, the sound of that broke me completely. 2%. We'd walked into 2% and come back out the other side dragging the 98 behind us. They didn't give her a medal, not at first. That's the part people don't expect. There was an inquiry, there had to be. She defied a lawful stand-down order and 6 people had followed her, and an officer had falsified a systems log to buy her 4 minutes. By the arithmetic of the Corps, she should have been discharged, maybe worse. She stood in front of the review board and she didn't defend herself with heroics. She did what she always did. She took their assessment apart. You gave it 2%, she said, and you were right on your assumptions. I'm not here to tell you the number was wrong. The number was correct. I'm here to tell you that a correct number is not the same thing as a decision, and somewhere along the way this whole fleet forgot the difference. You taught us to respect the math. Fine. I respect it. I respected it enough to look at what it was actually made of instead of just reading you the total off the bottom. She let that sit. 206 people are alive because I asked what the other 98% was made of. That's not recklessness. That's the most careful thing I've ever done. The board sat with that for a long time. I know because I was one of the 7 who testified, and I told them the truth, that I'd followed her not because I stopped believing in the number, but because for the first time in 41 cycles, I'd met someone who understood what the number was for. That the arithmetic was supposed to serve the living. And somewhere in our long, careful history, we'd inverted it and started feeding the living to the arithmetic and calling it wisdom. They didn't discharge her. They didn't give her a medal either. They did something stranger, something I think was braver, for an institution. They changed the training. Within the cycle, the resolution ceiling was gone. The lose correctly scenarios were rewritten. Cadets were still taught the math, of course they were. The math keeps you alive, but they were taught something new alongside it. They were taught that the number is where you start the thinking, not where you stop it. That 2% is a description of the problem, not a verdict on it. That the last decision is always, always yours. They called it the Sohn Doctrine eventually. She hated the name. Said doctrines were just numbers people stopped questioning, and the whole point was to never stop. I served another 20 cycles after that. I saw a lot. I made choices, sent people into bad numbers and lost some of them, and saved some I had no right to save. And through all of it, I carried that cold winter cycle on threshold 9, the small human who came up to my shoulder and looked at a locked door like she already had the key. She's gone now. Long gone, the way the warm-blooded ones go, too fast, always too fast. But I think about her most days. I think about her when I meet young soldiers who have learned to read the number off the bottom and stop, who mistake surrender for wisdom, who honor the arithmetic and forget the people it was built to protect. I tell them her story. I tell them about the 2%. And I tell them what she asked, the question that broke my people's oldest and coldest certainty, the question that pulled 206 souls out of a dying ship, the question I want carved on whatever they carve things on when I'm gone. They'll always tell you the odds. That's their job. They'll give you the 2% and they'll be right about it and they'll mean well and the number will be true. But when they hand you the 2%, you look them dead in the eye and you ask the only question that ever mattered. You ask them what the other 98 is made of. And then you go find out.